All right, well, welcome. I'm Megan Lovely with the City of Wichita. With me is Shala Perez and Tabitha Lehman. They're board members with the Wichita Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board. Today, we're discussing the board's recommendations on the non-discrimination ordinance, which has been a topic of much discussion in the community. We're talking a little bit about the process the board underwent to hear from the community and formulate recommendations to give to the council, which will come up on October 12th. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. Tell me a little bit about your backgrounds. Tabitha, we can start with you if that's
Sure.
okay.
Well, my most recent job was as the Sedgwick County Election Commissioner, and I was in that position for just shy of 10 years. So I've been working with the public a lot and am very familiar with getting public input, and certainly this was a little more low-key for me than I'm used to in that role. So,
Shala, what about you?
I'm the District 2 Advisory Board member appointed by Becky Tuttle, and my background is law enforcement and secondary education. I teach criminal justice, and I've previously worked as Executive Director under the Governor for the Kansas Hispanic and Latino American Affairs Commission and the Governor's Task Force on Racial Profiling.
Both of those backgrounds sound like they'd be really useful on this
Yes.
board. The board was formed to address topics that would be barriers to inclusion in our community and to provide recommendations specifically to the council to make our city as equitable and inclusive as possible. We were going to take questions, but Facebook is down today. So if you're tuning in live on YouTube as we film this, please feel free to write your questions and we'll try to address them at the end of this broadcast. Otherwise, we encourage people to reach out to the council or to the board members with questions about their recommendation or about the process. So Charlotte, could you please start off by telling me a little bit about your experience on the board so far?
So we are newly formed, and so we have spent the first few meetings that we've had getting our processes together and kind of getting an agenda going and establishing the board bylaws, those kind of preliminary things that we needed to get done so that we could get underway. So this issue was the kind of first issue that the board had before us and that we started working on.
Yeah. I know it was the first big undertaking for the board, and you know it's hard to start a board, and especially with something as public and as important as this. So you guys came up with the recommendations. They are posted on the website now, and we'll post another link to them later in the comments of this video in case you haven't seen it. Tabitha, can you tell us a little bit about the process of reviewing the proposed non-discrimination ordinance? How did you tackle reviewing it and getting feedback?
well, the first thing I think most of us did before we even had really our first meeting on the subject is most of the board went ahead and watched the city council meetings and watched the public input that was provided at those city council meetings, so that we had a pretty decent understanding of what the concerns were going to be and what the needs of the community were coming into our first time meeting it. But then first time meeting to discuss it, I apologize. But then, you know, reading through the ordinance, we had questions that we sent back to the city. They provided us with research as far as other cities that have gone through this process, cities both in Kansas and outside of Kansas, cities that had ordinances just like ours, some that were, you know, somewhat different, or proposed ordinances, I should say. And so we as a board then, when we met to discuss the topic, it was very important to the entire board that we have public input directly to us. So, of course, we had established, the city had established an email address that people could provide public input. But then we established on September 15th, the board itself had a open comment. The entire purpose of the meeting was for the public to be able to come and to comment. We also, multiple members of the board went out to the public ourselves. You know, I met with multiple people, both for and against the ordinance, myself personally. I know Charlotte did as well, and I believe other board members did too. We've attended district advisory board meetings, all kinds of different other meetings and events. I'm involved with the League of Women Voters, so there were conversations about this going on with them that I attended. So there was a lot of opportunity that we took that was above and beyond just what was necessary for the board to make sure we had that public input and that we heard the concerns of the public.
What sorts of things did you guys hear during this process?
Well, I think a lot of us had connections in the community already. Many of us have served on multiple boards previously, so we wanted to make sure that we really tried to get information from everybody affected at least, and that was a big undertaking, I think, for most of us. But I think primarily we heard a lot of positive comments about it. There were some concerns that were shared with us, and we, like Tabitha said, we were back and forth speaking with the city attorney and different people to get advice to kind of work out what some of those concerns look like. And we did find in one particular instance that a lot of people seemed to be concerned about previous drafts. So there was kind of some misinformation that was floating around out there. I think there were a lot of communication attempts by various people on the city council and others to really make sure that everybody was looking at the correct document and the information that we had. I think after we got past that and had some public comments, the majority of what we heard from most people who were affected was very positive about the ordinance.
That's great. How many people, if you could guess, how many people do you think you heard from?
You know, that's hard to say. I think we had, at one of our meetings before we even really tackled the ordinance, but when there was conversation about it, I think we maybe had 20, 25 people speak, and then when we had our public comment meeting, there were fewer than 30 that came to that, and we have definitely received some emails. I did not stop and count how many emails we received from the public. And you know, there were certainly areas of concerns that different segments of the population had. Like Shala said, it was very good to be able to ask those questions of not just the city attorneys, but then I did forget to mention that there were also the facilitated meetings by the Kansas Leadership Center that we participated in. Those weren't our meetings, but we participated in those meetings, and certainly we were able to hear concerns from both sides of this issue. And then there were some outstanding questions that those attorneys weren't able to answer that then the city attorneys researched to get us some input on. And so there was quite a bit of time that we spent. It was very important to the board that we have community input on this before we make our decision.
Yeah.
And I would add that meeting that we had with the KLC did involve a group of stakeholders that were identified. So we did make an attempt to really reach out to stakeholders. I know individually, I contacted everybody that I knew from working for the governor's office and various businesses, just being active as a resident in Wichita. I contacted people from the governor's office, like I said, that had to do with the Kansas Hispanic and Latino American Affairs Commission, all of their people that they had come into contact with, as well as groups here that deal with the affected populations. We had veterans groups, we had groups working with seeing eye dogs, we had groups like Envision that dealt with disabilities. We had, of course, the LGBTQ community. So we really tried to use all of our resources possible to connect with people in the community. So it's really hard to say how many people we actually contacted, but I know I have quite a few on my Facebook. I probably reached out to, I would say, at least 50 people and organizations, not-for-profits, business leaders, and spoke with those types of people.
Yeah, sounds like a wide reach. How do you feel the recommendations from the board will help the city council as they move forward with looking at the proposed non-discrimination ordinance?
I would hope that that they will certainly read what our recommendations were and understand that we did not just go about this, just doing the minimum that was possible. There were several of us that were very, very active and like Shala said, going out and looking for people who had an opinion one way or the other, who were affected by it. We heard a lot from religious leaders and faith-based organizations, and in the end it was very interesting to me that we actually heard from more individuals in the faith community who supported the NDO than we did who opposed it. And so that was an important piece for me as well. But I lost my train of thought. I am so sorry. What was the question? I kind of jumped in and now I don't remember where I was going. I'm sorry.
So you guys have shared this with council and it's now on the website.
Okay. So I certainly hope that between the KLC report and the report that we put forward, that council members would take the time to read that and help them with any questions that they had. And certainly, I assume they also have access to the legal advice we got from the city attorney as well, and hope that that will help them make their decisions moving forward as well.
I know the big concern was public input and getting public input, and there was some concern early on about how the process went forward in the beginning. And so I would hope that they would know that we did everything in our power to make sure that we sought public input, and that we really tried to do our best to make sure that our recommendation was reflective of the community.
Wonderful. Anything, Shala, Tabitha, you want to add about the process or the recommendations?
Obviously, we will present, members of our board will present our report at the city council meeting on October 12th. Certainly, the time for input from the public is not over. The city council has not voted on this, so there's still time if they would like to provide input. But just know that we, as Shala said, and as I've said multiple times, we did everything in our power to make sure we had as much public input as we could on this process and still meet the deadlines that we had before us. But I hope the public understands that we took this very seriously, both in examining the proposed ordinance itself. We did make a couple of recommendations for changes or things that they might want to look at. But overwhelmingly, the board was definitely in favor of the proposed non-discrimination ordinance.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for all of your work during this process, and thank you for coming today. Again, the proposed non-discrimination ordinance will come back before council on Tuesday, October 12th. You're welcome to continue to provide feedback by coming to that meeting or emailing your city council member or members of the Diversity and Inclusion Board. With that, thank you guys so much, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.